70,000 people are here, and Bob Dylan is the reason for it.
Inspired by their true story.
For anyone who's gonna hold your attention on a stage, you have to kind of be a freak.
Are you a freak?
Hope so.
And starring Timothée Chalamet as Bob Dylan. He defied everyone.
Turn it down! Play loud!
To change everything.
Make some noise, BD.
Timothy Chalamet, Edward Norton, Elle Fanning, Monica Barbaro, a complete unknown. Now playing only in theaters. Rated R, under 17, not admitted without parent.
We
are
Cultivate.
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 Cultivate. We are Cultivate.
Hello and welcome to Ye Olde Crime, where we discuss the funny, strange, and obscure crimes of yesteryear. I'm your host, Lindsay Valenti, and with me is my sister and co-host, Maddie Stengel.
Hello.
Hello. Okay. Last call for our TeePublic sale, 35% off December 25th through the 31st. So you can ring in the new year with some Ye Olde Crime merch. And there is a link to it in the show notes if you want to check it out.
Nice.
And to close out 2024.
This really great year for both of us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Really great.
I thought we could discuss the Christmas murder of Josephine Brown.
Dark choice. Okay. Just ending it the way we've had it.
I could have bookended it with cannibalism, considering we started with cannibalism.
You know, okay, fair. Yep.
I did this for you. I did this for you.
I'm rolling it back. Let's talk murder.
You're right.
You know what? I was wrong.
Merry Christmas, Maddie. Here's some murder. So information was pulled from the following sources. A 2016 Murder by Gaslight blog post by Robert Wilhelm, 5 Boston Evening Transcript articles from 1891,
Ooh.
7 The Boston Globe articles from 1891,
Wow.
1 The Boston Weekly Globe article from 1891, and 3 Find a Grave listings.
Ooh. I'm honestly kind of excited that most of the information came from the time itself. Like that's pretty exciting. It's very rare that we actually get stories that get to be told at the time in the voice of when it happened.
I would say 90% of this is all just from newspapers.
That's really cool. I'm looking forward to that.
And links to all of these articles will be included in the show notes. If you love the show, the best way to support us is to leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, Good Pods, CastBox, Podcast Addict, and or Audible. Links to all of these are in our show notes, or if you're already listening on one of these platforms, you know what to do.
Oh, and while you're at it, shoot us a question you'd like to hear us answer on the pod. We'll give you a special shout out and address your burning questions all at the same time. The weirder, the better. Submit them via link in our show notes or shoot them to us in our DMs.
Josephine Josie Gilman was born in 1855 in Boston, the daughter of Joseph and Mary Murphy Gilman.
Nice.
She also had an older sister named Julia, who was born in 1841.
Do you think she was like, since her dad's name was Joseph, she was essentially the Joseph Jr.?
Yes.
Nice.
Yes.
And then continuing the J name theme too. Like maybe he was mad that Julia didn't get Josephine, so this was his chance.
Yeah, he was like, okay, we didn't have a boy. I got to get this in there somehow. Josephine. Yep. Josie married Franklin M. Brown in 1870 in Boston at the age of 15 and subsequently divorced by the time she was 20.
Oh no. So that was not a good time for her.
I couldn't find much of anything about Franklin to know how old he was or any other information other than what was listed on her Find a Grave page.
Okay.
All I got was his name and the year they got married. That's it. I don't even know where he's buried.
That's crazy. Oh, okay. A little suspicious, but sure.
Yeah. Josie's family blamed her for the dissolution of her marriage to Franklin.
Of course they did.
And turned her away, essentially cutting her out of their lives.
Ugh, awful. And she's just 20. She was just a baby when it started, and she's still a baby when it ended.
It was even noted in her obit that, quote, the husband of the dead woman is a modest businessman of this city. When the couple were married, the wife was a good woman, and for a time they lived happily together. But the wife proved untrue to her marriage vows, and the husband, learning of her unfaithfulness, separated from her, end quote.
Sure, because all relationships are always that simple.
Yep.
Especially during that time. We're saying the young woman who was just a child when she got married is the sole reason. Cool. Yeah.
I call bullshit, but, whatever. We don't know.
No second accounts here.
No.
Yes.
Josie would do what many young women with no options or prospects were forced to do during this time in history. She turned to sex work.
Yeah.
Known by the moniker of Jo when working on the street, Josie was employed at a brothel that was run by Mrs. Mary A. Fisher at number 38 Pitt Street in the West End of Boston, Massachusetts. At least, she was, until Mrs. Fisher was arrested, forcing the house to close, which meant that Josie now had to work on the street.
That would be so scary for all those girls. Like I'm sure the house probably wasn't that much better, but at least like you knew you had a room.
Mm-hmm. You had a roof over your head. Relative safety.
Gosh, I wonder how many other girls were displaced. That has to be so scary.
Mm-hmm. Josie was known as having a particular affinity for whiskey.
Yeah, I wonder why she wants to. I wonder why she needs to numb something. Wow.
Yeah. And without a roof over her head and a quote-unquote steady job to occupy her time, she was left to her own devices and quickly began to indulge in her vices unchecked. To be clear, this is not me victim shaming. This is me stating the facts as I was able to verify them.
Well, and it's very much in the tone of the time. Like it's like continuously her fault. And so of course she would turn to drink, regardless of whether or not maybe that was the only liquid she was offered ever.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that was the only thing she could actually get. And honestly, if I was stuck on the streets and I had that trajectory she had, I don't know if I would, like, I might have done the same thing too. You don't know. I can't imagine how hard that is, especially during that time with all, like, stigma times a million too. Like, it's not much better now, but definitely wasn't good then.
No. Now, on the afternoon of December 23rd, 1891, Josie was seen in the company of a man who would go on to be named Roger Scannell.
Mm-hmm.
He was described by the Boston City Transcript as, quote, 25 years of age, 5 foot 8 inches in height, 140 to 145 pounds weight, complexion medium but inclined to be light, small light-colored mustache, high cheekbones, face narrowing sharply from cheekbones to chin, consumptive look, pretty square shoulders viewed from behind, small waist and hips, end quote.
What an invasive description of the man. Like, okay, they were trying to make him sound sickly and small. Got it. So we're already saying that he's innocent. A little bit.
According to the Boston Globe, Roger Scannell was, quote, 24 years old and was born in Ireland. He came to Lawrence, which I'll get back to, 9 years ago in company with Mrs. Sullivan, who was then unmarried and is his only sister. She is almost of the same age as her brother, and the two were on the most affectionate terms. She thought so much of him that she saved up enough money to pay both their passages to this country, and without a single relative and while mere children, they took up their life in the busy city of Lawrence, end quote.
Like most people at the time, that was a harsh time for most people.
And just because I had to look it up, because it's going to be recurring in the story, Lawrence, Massachusetts is almost 30 miles north of Boston. So not necessarily a close neighboring city, but close enough.
Okay. So probably like a good amount of travel, but probably often traveled, commuted fairly often, I would assume.
Now, I'll do my best to piece the date together as best I can based on newspaper coverage of the event. So I tried to get it as chronologically in order as humanly possible because, as I listed, there were several newspaper articles.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
On December 23rd, a man named John Morin, quote, an old resident of that street who is well known to the police as a man who is incapable of uttering a falsehood, end quote.
Okay, so an informant. Got it. Bit of a narky narc.
Bit of a looky-loo. Stated that he saw Josie and a man around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Josie was walking up Norman Street from Merrimack, and a man that is believed to be Roger was walking in the opposite direction. Upon encountering one another, they stopped for a moment, then left each other's company, and not long after this, John attested that he saw them meet up again, engage in a long talk, and then set out together. So I don't know if they crossed paths, said hey, and then kept walking and then turned around and went back. I don't know how they, but it had to have happened on the same street, within view of his home.
Right. And he's really checking it out. He's thorough. But yes, that would look shady if you saw a couple interacting just briefly, pretending to leave and then circling back.
Yep.
I get it.
Yeah.
Just mind your business.
Not much is known about Josie's whereabouts until much later, around 11 p.m.
Oh. Yeah, that's a long amount of time. 2 p.m. to 11 p.m. That's a good amount of time gone.
A cab driver named Henry L. I'm going to pronounce it Giggy. It's spelled Giggey. Giggy.
Okay.
Encountered Josie in the company of two men at the corner of Washington and Hanover Streets. He had been stationed at the opposite corner when Josie ran up to his stand, begging for his assistance as the two men were quarreling about her, and one had pulled a revolver out of his pocket and threatened to shoot the other.
Oh, that's not great.
Henry aided Josie by helping the man with the revolver into his cab upon her request, before taking the man and her to the Sudbury house, where he dropped them off around 11:15 p.m. He would later comment to police that the other man, who was part of the scuffle, had already arrived at the Sudbury house at the time that he dropped the pair off, but he didn't think that this third man followed the couple upstairs into the building.
How alarming, though. If you saw that whole encounter and the whole point was to get him away and the guy's there, that would be really scary. But I can also see how he would be like, that's none of my business.
Yeah.
Because I doubt he would get much business if he constantly intervened.
And the Sudbury house was essentially a cheap lodging house, a place you would stay if you had nowhere else to go, and it was a frequent stop for people looking to employ the services of sex workers.
Right. So it's already a spot that he doesn't really want to stick around anyway. So he's like, oh, he was there, but I left because I didn't want to be there.
Yeah, I didn't want to stick around. According to a night clerk, a man named Mr. Allen, at the time that they checked in, Josie and her male companion brought with them a dinner of fried oysters and an unopened bottle of whiskey.
Oh, okay.
And that was at 11:15 or 11:30ish, whenever, So nothing else would be heard regarding the couple until a little past 1 a.m., when Mr. Allen heard 2 gunshots, followed by a shriek from upstairs.
Uh-oh.
After running upstairs, he was met in the hallway by the male occupant of room 14, who told him that the shots came from room 16 across the hall from him. Mr. Allen proceeded to get a chair and prop it against the door so he could peek through the transom. And because I didn't know what it was, a transom is the small window you will sometimes see above doors in like homes, in like old homes or businesses.
Yeah. I wonder if it, when you looked it up, is it part of like a pseudo egress, or like why did they have those little windows? Do you know?
I didn't look too deep in it. Like transom is
Okay.
actually the name of the bar that separates the little window from the door. I don't know.
Yeah, because you see them in really, really old homes, and it's like a old ventilation kind of thing, or I don't know.
Maybe. While looking through the window, he, quote, saw a woman lying on the bed with blood flowing from wounds in her head. She was apparently dead, end quote. Near her was a partially dressed man that was lying across the bed with his pistol pointed at the door, as if waiting to shoot anyone who would come barging in.
Oh.
Mr. Allen immediately asked Hosea Barton, another night clerk, to find a policeman. And this is where things immediately go wrong.
Great.
As if it wasn't already wrong enough.
Right.
As noted in the Boston Globe on December 24th, 1891, quote, one of the strangest features of the tragedy is the fact that when the night clerk ran out and asked the first policeman he saw to come down and arrest parties who were having a row, the officer is alleged to have said that he would not leave his beat, end quote.
He did it, didn't he? Or like it was a cop or something. No, maybe not. I suppose at that place, I wonder if maybe violence was super frequent, and he was like, I'm not risking my life if somebody just got shot. There could be a million other things, but not cool. Not a good look. Serve and protect who? Apparently nobody.
Yeah. Hosea would go on to find 2 officers who promptly went to help, but by the time he returned with them, 45 minutes had already elapsed, and the murderer had escaped.
I wonder, like, how... I can't imagine their place super close to that area. If it's like a known bad spot, they might have not had good coverage anyway.
Patrolman Coolidge of Station 2, who refused to leave his beat, would later go on to be tried, which we'll get to later.
I'm not super optimistic about the outcome of that, but sure.
Now, once officers arrived on the scene, they broke down the door, where they discovered Josie lying on the bed, half-dressed, a bullet hole under one ear, in a pool of her own blood. The empty whiskey bottle was on the floor next to the bed, and by all appearances, the killer had left through the window, proceeded to climb down the fire escape to the Adeline house, where he, quote, entered through the kitchen window, which was open, and passed downstairs and out into Court Street, where he is supposed to have escaped in a herdic, end quote. A herdic was a very early version of a cab, a small, 2-wheel horse-drawn carriage that had side seats and a rear entrance.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I was assuming it'd be almost like a...
kind of like a rickshaw type of thing.
Yeah, that's what I was envisioning. It was either like by a man or like a horse or like a smaller animal.
So with a herdic, drivers could back up to the sidewalk or buildings, so passengers could easily get in and out of the cart.
Got it.
That morning, Deputy Superintendent Burrell visited the scene of the crime. He noted that the murderer used the wash basin to remove traces of blood from his hands. When questioned, the night clerk shared that the man who rented the room shared that he had disposed of a piece of property and had received $500 for it yesterday. In today's money, that would have been around $17,000. And that's a lot of money to just have on your person.
Yeah.
And to let people know that you have.
Yeah.
So with this knowledge, police began to believe that the crime wasn't premeditated, but perhaps the result of a quarrel over money. which 1,000% makes sense.
Yeah, it could be.
The papers would go on to note, quote, "The police have 3 men under arrest on suspicion, but it is quite certain that neither of them committed the deed," end quote.
Okay.
So about 12 o'clock the night of the murder, so not that long after Josie and the man that was with her arrived, another of the Sudbury House lodgers encountered a man by the front door who stated that he was waiting for his friend from Lawrence, who was currently inside with a woman. He went on to share that he and this friend had argued hotly over the woman, and knowing they were inside, he intended, quote, "to get square with them," end quote. The lodger in question, who stated that he lived in South Boston and was a railroad man by trade, would go on to be held at Station 3 to act as a witness. So is it entirely possible that he encountered the same man that Henry, the cab driver, had seen outside the Sudbury house when he dropped Josie off earlier that night? And how long was he out there?
Yeah.
The murder made the front page of the Boston Globe on December 24th, 1891, under the headline, "Done in Wrath." Quote, "Louis Chick, the man first arrested on suspicion this morning. Being searched, a revolver was found. All the chambers were loaded, however, and there is at present no evidence that he is the murderer. He has given a straight account of himself and has been discharged."
Okay.
Michael Sullivan of Cambridge, who was also arrested at an early hour with a scratched face and blood on his clothes, has likewise been released. He said he was scratched by a girl as he was attempting to kiss her, and he told where the girl could be found. When looked up by the officers, the girl confirmed Sullivan's story, and to make assurance doubly sure, the night clerk at the Sudbury house was positive that Sullivan was not the man who registered as Scannell, so Sullivan was allowed to go, end quote.
That just makes me really sad that, like, that happened enough where they're like, oh, yeah. No, she just rebuffed his advances and it's a normal thing. Cool.
The Scannell in question is, of course, Roger, which we will get to. But first, I need to share with you the conflicting descriptions of his appearance. So I shared his appearance at the top.
Yeah, so he was sickly, tapered waist, sharp features.
Yep.
Yep.
So according to a Boston Globe article, quote, "Mr. Morin, the looky-loo, described the man as being about 33 years old, about 5 feet 7 inches, thin face with high cheekbones, and he wore a light mustache that grew darker towards the ends. He had on a dark mixed suit, dark checked shirt with collar of same, wore a soft hat, dented in the crown, and a brown overcoat that reached to his calves. The above description is identical with the one given by the clerk of the Sudbury house, with the exception of the hat. And on this point, the clerk insists that he wore a cap with 2 buttons in front." The Sudbury house clerk claimed that the murderer was scarcely 5'6" in height, porky, ruddy, and with a blonde mustache, end quote.
So a completely different description at this point.
Yep. Same outfit, different look.
Everything.
Different everything else, yeah.
Yeah, and you can't just like become overweight in just a few hours.
Yeah. Unless he was having an allergic reaction to the oysters, who knows? But
hey, I mean, the shellfish, and then the murderer dies in the corner somewhere.
Yeah. The Boston Evening Transcript noted, quote, "He was about 35 years of age, 5 foot 8 inches in height, had a black or brown mustache, and wore a checkered shirt. He did not seem to be intoxicated," end quote. Now, when looking at the books, the man registered at the hotel was R.T. Scannell of Lawrence, Massachusetts. So later that same day, Inspectors Houghton and Mahoney were dispatched to Lawrence to see if they could learn more about this R.T. Scannell, to see if he was in fact a real person or if this was an alias.
Because very likely it would be an alias. It was pretty easy to travel with an alias at the time, especially to a house like that.
They found upon arriving at Lawrence that there were several R. Scannells who lived there.
I'm sure.
but one of them had a minor police record.
Oh.
Quote, he was before the police court in 1886 for drunkenness, May 8th, 1888 for maintaining a liquor nuisance, for which offense he served 4 months in the House of Correction, January 14th, 1889 on charge of implication in a larceny case, August 21st, 1890, drunkenness, sentence 30 days, August 24th, sentenced to 1 year in the House of Correction for larceny, from which he appealed and escaped, owing to some flaw in the indictment. October 18th, 1890, was fined $5 and costs for drunkenness and disturbance.
So his alcoholism is just getting worse and worse, and he's resorting to stealing to likely feed his addiction.
When not in jail, Scannell worked in the Russell Paper Company's mills a portion of the time, but losing his position there, he entered the employ of a local tea merchant of this city as traveling salesman. He left the place about 3 months ago, but has been seen in the city several times since then by the local officers, who know him well.
I'm sure they do, and I'm sure they watch him pretty closely if he's constantly getting picked up for being drunk.
James Taylor, the tea merchant, states that it was nearly 2 years ago when Scannell was in his employ, end quote.
Dang. And he never really quit. He just disappeared, it sounds like.
Yeah.
He's like, you gotta go back to work? I've seen you around, man. He's just like, gone.
What's going on, my guy? It was noted in another article that thanks to the support of the Lawrence police, they were able to check and verify all the Rogers in town and narrow it down to R.T. Scannell, who had formerly lived at 49 Chestnut Street. And it was there that they ran into Mrs. John Sullivan. Noted as, quote, a comely and estimable young woman, the wife of a hard-working and respected man, and the mother of several children, end quote. She would go on to admit that she had a brother by the name of Roger Scannell that she hadn't seen for some time that had a, quote, wild disposition, end quote, that was, quote, marred by police court incidents, end quote.
Ah, they found their home.
One that was noted in the Globe stated, quote, he came into notoriety 6 years ago when he fired several shots at a man in a disreputable house at Messrs. Crossing. He left town after this affair and remained away until it had been almost forgotten, end quote.
Until he did it in Boston.
When she was informed of the murder that her brother was suspected of committing, she adamantly refused to believe he could have taken part in something so heinous. Additionally, her description of her brother's appearance was very different from that of the night clerk at Sudbury House, but it also met up with all the other descriptions of him.
Right. Like all the other ones are linking up. So it's pretty clear to me that the night clerk was either maybe given some money or like there's a reason why they're saying this differently. I don't know. It just seems strange that or maybe if he did see him in passing, he did look ruddy looking with a red face. If he was really upset and drunk and in a hurry.
Because just because they showed up with an unopened bottle of liquor doesn't mean they hadn't previously been drinking.
Right.
Especially if there was a loud quarrel before they were being dropped off.
Yeah. And you can look porky if your face is all flushed and you're bloated from potentially eating bad seafood, drinking heavily, if he was an alcoholic.
And 9 hours had elapsed between the time when Mr. Morin saw him and they got dropped off at the Sudbury House. That's a long time.
That's a long time. Well, and the description porky too. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Porky is in pink?
Who knows?
Yeah.
She refused to believe her brother could have anything to do with the crime. Quote, until I get some proof of it, I don't think he is a man who would do such a thing, although he was hot-headed and decidedly quick-tempered, end quote.
Yeah, it would be really hard to admit as the sister who probably has been trying to help him this whole time. I mean, His address is hers.
Well, she's the one that paid his way to get here from Ireland.
She's responsible for him.
Yeah.
And it was probably really scary. He is capable of it, but you don't want to believe it.
A reporter visited her home, having with him a tissue copy of the signature from the Sudbury House Register. And upon seeing it, she let out a cry of anguish and grabbed onto her husband to prevent her from swooning. Quote, "My God, it is too true. My brother Roger, a murderer. I cannot doubt it any longer. Oh, why did he do it? Oh, why did he do it? If he had only taken my advice, this thing would not have happened." End quote.
That's really sad.
She would later share details of his life, such as how things were great until Roger stopped working at the mills to instead work mixing drinks in an unlicensed dive bar.
Mm-hmm.
Even so, no one really would call him a hardened criminal. Keep in mind, in July of 1890, he had been working at the Russell Paper Company, was known as a dependable workman, and his employers all gave him high praise for his work.
You can be really good at your job and still have an entirely different existence.
Yep.
In a week. Circumstances can change.
Interestingly, an article that was also published in the December 24th edition of the Boston Globe called out Roger's scandal, but this time for larceny. This was further back in that same edition. It noted that 10 days prior, in Stoughton, Massachusetts, he had been boarding at James Hurley's and left very early the day before. A peddler by the name of Burek stated that after Roger had left, he discovered that he was missing $20 in cash, or around $690 today, as well as car tickets and jewelry that totaled up to about $70, or around $2,400 today.
So this is probably how he started collecting all of the money he had.
In the write-up, he was described as having a light mustache and hair and was about 5 foot 8 inches tall. It was also noted that he had a revolver with him, in addition to quite a sum of money. When officers had arrived at the boarding house to investigate the theft, they searched a trunk that he had apparently left behind, finding in it several letters to a young woman in Lawrence. It further states that the revolver had been taken from Roger a few days prior to his disappearance by a man named William Hurley, who kept it safe under his pillow.
Oh yeah, that's super secure.
Upon waking the day of Roger's early departure, the revolver was gone, as well as clothing from several of the other boarders. So a warrant was issued in Stoughton for Roger's arrest for larceny.
Yeah.
In this same edition of the paper, it stated, quote, "Scannell left Lawrence last August for New York. Since then, until last Tuesday, friends and relatives have learned nothing from him. On Tuesday, a former sweetheart of his learned that Scannell was in Boston, that he was tired of wandering and would return to Lawrence Christmas Eve. The police feel confident that Scannell will come to Lawrence, and every avenue to the city is being carefully watched." End quote.
I'm sure.
As the Boston police were piecing together Roger's criminal history, officers in Pemberton Square discovered that he had arrived at Boston between 1 and 3 o'clock Wednesday morning before appearing on Norman Street at 2 p.m. that afternoon, which corroborates Mr. Morin's story. On December 25th, the Globe published that, quote, "Uniformed officers are now watching the inward trains in the hope that Scannell will come back to Lawrence again after an absence of several months so that they can catch him." End quote.
Why would you put that in the paper? He can read that and not show up.
Because they didn't think about that. This was the time when they published where you lived. They published your addresses.
Yeah. You know what I'm thinking about now too, though? If he had committed larceny, right before the crime, he absolutely could have attempted to color his mustache or his hair, change his hat or his hair. You know how they keep going from blonde to, at one point they said it was dark in the middle and got lighter on the edges. That to me is he put ink or something. He put something on his mustache to disguise himself.
To disguise himself, yeah.
So
we're going to go back to Josie now.
Oh.
In the December 26th edition of the Boston Evening Transcript, it stated, quote, "Medical examiner Harris made an autopsy on the body of the murdered woman yesterday. Both of the bullets fired by Scannell entered at the ear. One glanced off the skull, but the other entered the brain and caused instant death.
Mm-hmm.
The lips had been cut by a blow, and there was a bruise on the throat. The motive for the murder seems to have been revenge. The man had probably been robbed. The police are working hard to capture the fugitive, but it is believed that he is now in hiding near Lawrence." End quote.
What a sad thing.
The Sunday, December 27th edition of the Boston Globe published the following under the headline, "Josie Brown Buried." Quote, "Sister of the murdered woman takes charge of the remains. Scandal not yet discovered by the police. From the rooms of Undertaker Tinkham on Howard Street yesterday morning, the body of Josie Brown, the victim of Thursday morning's shooting affray at the Sudbury House, was borne to its last resting place. The funeral of the deceased was in charge by a sister of the victim, a highly respectable woman of this city. The burial service was very simple, and the interment was at Cedar Grove Cemetery, Dorchester. The Herdick driver who carried Roger Scannell from the vicinity of the murder says that his destination was the Lowell Depot, but later developments show that a man answering the supposed murderer's description registered at the Hotel Eastern shortly after the murder and remained at the hotel until after breakfast, when he paid his bill and departed. He did not register at the Eastern under the name of Scannell, but the police say that there is a similarity in the handwriting. No trace of the supposed murderer has been found after leaving the Hotel Eastern. The second man, who was seen standing on the corner of Hanover and Washington Streets with the Brown woman before the murder, has been found by the police. He is a well-known West Ender, but asserts that he did not see the victim after 10 o'clock Wednesday evening. The police of suburban towns are on the lookout for Scannell, and the houses of his friends and relatives are being watched." End quote.
That would be so scary to be him at that time. Could you imagine?
Oh, God. The following day, Monday, December 28th, 1891, the Boston Globe addressed the trial of Patrolman Coolidge. Quote, "Another step in investigation of the murder of Josephine Brown at the Sudbury House last Thursday morning was taken this forenoon by the police department, when Patrolman James E. Coolidge of Division 2 was summoned before the Board of Police, charged with a violation of Rule 24, to wit, neglect of duty.
Yep.
Soon after the murder occurred, it appears that the clerk of the house, after he had been hunting for some time for a police officer, found Patrolman Coolidge on Somerset Street directly back of the courthouse. According to the testimony given at the hearing, it appears that the clerk told Coolidge that there was trouble at the Sudbury House and asked him to go and quell it. It is claimed that the clerk did not intimate that possibly a murder had been committed, and the officer, as he did not suppose the trouble was of any great moment, refused to leave his beat, but told the clerk that he would find an officer of Division 3 on a beat near the house. When a policeman was finally found, the murderer had escaped. As a defense for the officer's action, it is said by many members of the department that it is not customary for an officer to leave his beat unless he knows that some crime has been committed. The hearing this forenoon was a lengthy one, and although the board reserves its decision till a general order is issued, it is believed that the officer will at least be reprimanded. Patrolman Coolidge has been in the department for 15 years. End quote.
So nothing happened to him?
No, I'm sure nothing did. Police were hopeful that Roger would see all the police coverage and decide to turn himself in.
Oh, yeah. Wow. These police officers are really the worst in general. Protect and serve who?
Even going so far as intimating that he, quote, had a good defense, end quote, if Josie and the other man who had been stationed outside the Sudbury house had been trying to con him out of his money.
Do you think they would have said that, though, as like a ruse to help lure him out? Like, we actually think he's innocent. If only he would just show up. Like that's what I want it to be, but just based on that previous trial probably is not true, and history shows that they trust men with money over sex workers that happen to be in a bad place at a bad time.
4 years later,
4 years.
Josie's case had gone cold. The Boston Daily Globe printed a picture of Roger, along with both of his aliases, which included R. O'Connell, hoping that someone would recognize him and turn him into authorities. The description went so far as to note, quote, one shoulder a little lower than the other, first joint of forefinger on left hand a little stiff and turned in on account of an accident. Wore at that time a flat-topped Scotch cap with 2 or 3 buttons in front. Blue and white gingham shirt, black cutaway coat and vest, blue and black stripes in pants, and a gray check ulster, brown stripe, well worn, 4 pockets on the outside and 1 in each sleeve. Speaks with a slight brogue and an affected air. Wears a 14-1-2 collar and number 8 or number 9 shoe. Frequents kitchen bar rooms and cheap lodging rooms with low women. End quote.
And where was this description 4 years ago? Because I'm pretty sure they probably had it, especially from Looky Lou What's-His-Face. Because those are some pretty intense details that somebody like him would probably have given them at the time.
Well, this was included, but they republished it.
Okay.
And even with all this,
Nothing.
No one responded. And for all intents and purposes, he was never caught.
Did he ever come back? Like, is there any record of him that we know of that we can find?
I couldn't find anything else to know for sure that it was him.
I really want to know more about his sister's husband, because her write-up was just so glowing that it makes me wonder if he was somebody important.
I think he was.
And they were protecting the family. And she probably asked him to protect him. And he did. Because that was quite the write-up. That was really alarming to me, that they really reiterated how great she was and how she came from a really great home and she had lovely children and a well-to-do husband.
Mm-hmm.
Why would you just say that? They've been covering for him for a long time.
I just feel bad that it just went to show for me how they cared so much more about the murderer and not the victim. Because in probably 2/3 of the articles that I read, she would have like a sentence about her. And the whole rest of the article would be about him.
Yeah, she was neglected from the start.
Mm-hmm.
She was cast aside before it even happened. Ugh, so gross. I'm so sorry, Josephine. How old was she when she died?
She was 36 the time she was murdered.
Oh, that's so sad. Just to get shot in the ear, too. Oh, God.
We wouldn't be here without support from listeners like you. If you're interested in supporting us financially, you can leave a one-time or monthly donation over on Buy Me a Coffee or our Venmo page. Links are in the show notes. And we make a point of reaching out to send you a thank you note and stickers to show our appreciation.
Want to show your support in a more concrete way? Pick up some Yield Crime merch over at our TeePublic shop. We shout out whenever there is a sale each month, and we work to make sure we're creating new designs and changing it up whenever possible. And hey, thanks for listening.
Hey there, true crime fans. Are you looking for a podcast that combines your love of crime stories with a good laugh? Look no further than the ODFM podcast. ODFM is the podcast that brings you true crime and comedy in a way you've never heard before. It's hosted by the dynamic duo of Kelly DeVries and Jenna Swanson, the kinds of friends who make inappropriate jokes and laugh at times they probably shouldn't. Kelly and Jenna take you on a wild ride with their unique blend of humor and gripping storytelling. From bizarre murders to unsolved mysteries, they delve deep into the darkest corners of the criminal underworld. all while keeping it light with their quick wit and relatable banter. With each episode, Kelly and Jenna bring something new and exciting to the table. No case is too small, too strange, or too scary for them to handle. So, what are you waiting for? Subscribe now wherever you get your podcasts and join the ODFM community. ODFM, where true crime meets comedy and the laughs are killer.
On that note, this week's podcast plug is the ODFM podcast. ODFM is a satirical true crime podcast hosted by Kelly DeVries and Jenna Swanson. Each week, they present true crime stories with their own dark brand of humor. The stories you hear are serious and true. Their comments and opinions are not. Dark stories, dark truths, and dark humor presented by former roommates now living in different states. It's part of the Darkcast network, and we'll have a link to their show in the show notes.
I sense lots of parallels with us.
Yes.
Kindred podcast.
Carrie Ann has a really good question for us.
Okay.
She says, out of the whole year, what episode was the hardest subject to talk about? Because I know that you won't remember, because I don't remember.
Thank you.
I am going to copy and paste the list of all the things that we discussed this year, because I wouldn't remember.
I so appreciate that. So I'd be like, Carrie Ann, that's a great question. I don't know. But now I might. Oh, the torso murders. Yeah, that wasn't great. Consuming mummies, that also was really gross. That was a relatively unpleasant one. The King of Sweden wasn't super great, if I remember right. He was kind of a piece of shit.
he was kind of a piece of shit, yeah.
He was pretty awful. I don't know, we've had some pretty dark ones this year.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Like, looking at these ones, there isn't one that I don't think is really... No. The Sand Creek Massacre Trail episode. Yep, sorry. Yep, that's the worst one. Because I didn't know about it, and it was really horrific, and it felt like something we should have known about, we should have learned about.
Yeah.
We should have always learned about that one. That should be a history we learn from and repeat so we don't do it again. What one did you think I'd pick? The cannibalism one of Jamestown?
I thought you were going to pick the Children of Lulico.
I thought about it, but while that one was really sad, that was just something that was super embedded in their culture, and kind of from what we've gleaned, the children, their suffering was kind of eased a little bit. Like, I know that they were drugged and it was probably really bad, but they also really wanted to make sure that the people who were being sacrificed really enjoyed the last time of their lives. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, there was consideration still.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas there was very much so no consideration during the massacre. Yeah. So, I don't know. I'd say that one's probably a close second, just because of how sad it was. But what about you?
I want to say that this is going to sound really bad, but I don't think any of these were really that difficult for me to go through and write. Just because
it's good though. I mean, you're getting used to it.
Desensitized to it, I guess. I guess just because it's sad. The Stone Babies was really sad.
Yeah, that one was really sad.
And it was messed up. Like, knowing that's a thing that can still happen to people, and that it's not as uncommon as we may think it is. I mean, obviously, I am horrified by the Sand Creek Massacre and the Nez Perce War. Anything that has to do with, like, slaughtering huge numbers of people, I'm not okay with.
I don't think most people are.
Most people feel the same way as me on that, but,
I think we can preface and say that the majority of the stories that we talk about, we're not going to like. and we find sad and depressing, but that's also why we talk about it. Like, just because they're sad and depressing and horrific doesn't mean they're not important to remember.
The Eugenia Martinez.
I was going to say that one too. Yeah. Right
that
above,
one was
right
hard.
before the story. That one was really hard.
Just because it was a little girl and it was messed up what
they
did
really
to her.
Dehumanized her.
And that's not okay. That was really fucked up.
So. They mistreated her entire life. She was always a farce.
Yeah. I would say that one.
That.
We'd love to hear from you, and there's a couple of ways you can reach out to us. You can email us at yeoldecrimepodcast@gmail.com, or you can send us story ideas, share any spooky stories you may have, fun gifts, or even just to say hello.
You can also reach out to us via snail mail. Remember mail? Our mailing address is Ye Olde Crime Podcast, P.O. Box 341, Wyoming, Minnesota 55092. Fun fact, we like to send out thank you cards with fun stickers you can't get at our shop, so it's worth the cost of a stamp.
I didn't tease it at the top, but I did want to note it. We got an email last week from a listener, and I kind of wanted to address it on the podcast instead of just sending an email to this person, just because of the way it was written and because I feel like it's important to acknowledge this.
And it was sent in a really nice, respectful way, too.
So, I'm just going to read it. Dear Lindsay and Madison, I recently listened to your episode on Charlotte Walker, and while I appreciate your focus on this lesser-known historical figure, I was surprised by the lack of critical thought applied to her story. You described Charlotte as a woman who repeatedly, quote, got one over, end quote, on the men she allegedly robbed, but this framing strikes me as a profound misreading of her situation. It dismisses the reality of her circumstances and perpetuates an oversimplified, even flippant narrative about her life. Consider the following. Charlotte Walker was repeatedly propositioned for sex by men who assumed her availability based on her presence in areas like St. Giles and Drury Lane, places unfairly associated with crime and prostitution. When she turned down their advances, these men retaliated, accusing her of theft or assault. And given that stolen goods were rarely found on her, their claims ring suspiciously false. This pattern reflects a deeper gendered power dynamic where men weaponize the legal system to punish Charlotte for refusing them. Her story isn't about outsmarting men, it's about enduring systemic injustice. Charlotte's numerous arrests and spirited defenses weren't evidence of trickery or cunning. They highlight how vulnerable women like her were victimized by societal assumptions, male entitlement, and a flawed legal system that privileged men's word over hers. Historians like Mary Clayton and researchers from London Lives have drawn attention to these issues, yet your episode failed to engage with this critical perspective. Reducing Charlotte's life to an almost comedic tale of clever criminality overlooks the harsher truths of her struggles and survival. It was a missed opportunity to tell a nuanced, meaningful story that challenges listeners to think critically about history, gender, and power. I encourage you to revisit Charlotte Walker's story with a more thoughtful and informed lens. She and your audience deserve better. I'm going to leave the person's name out because they'll know who they are.
Right.
I really appreciate this feedback. I will go on record as saying that we are not going to be re-releasing this episode only because it's done.
I will say, I appreciate that they reached out. I really do appreciate that they brought this back to us as something that is really important to bring attention to. And it's something that I will admit when I sit down and talk and hear about these stories with you, I don't always think critically or want to dive deeper. Like this podcast for me is a moment where you can tell me something really interesting that happened and I react organically the way I would normally react if you were telling me this story in a coffee shop, and that's how our podcast is formatted. And I'm actually kind of happy that we're addressing this email using this story too. I hope that while our reaction to this story with kind of some parallels in and some of the common injustices of the time and the very flippant just in total disregard people had for Josephine kind of mirrors Charlotte's people's attitudes towards Charlotte as well. And I see where she's coming from, and I would love to give that type of podcast, but we just don't have the bandwidth.
If you're looking for a very serious, straight-laced historical deep dive, that's not the type of podcast that we are. I will just go on record as saying it's not that I am opposed to going back and redoing the episode. It's that this isn't my full-time gig. The podcast is something that I do on the side. Like, I am not a seasoned professional historian. I do this on my own time that I am taking away from other things, and I still have a full-time job. I still have a family. I still have a life outside of the podcast. Knowing the type of podcast that we have, yes, I want to get things right when I am sharing like historical information about people, but I also do not have the time to dedicate to writing a 2 or 3 hour long episode that really dives deep into the people and places and events that we discuss on this show.
I'm sorry that we didn't meet your expectations, but at the same time, I'm really happy with the podcast that we have. I like that we use humor to cope with some of these really dark topics, and I like that we are able to address them and expose them to audiences, and then our audience can decide how deep they want to continue on. So
I'm just going to close it out by saying I appreciate the feedback. I always want to be called out if something I do is wrong so I can address it and fix it and do better in the future. That's important to me. I never want to be viewed as someone who is ignorant and who wants to stay ignorant, because that doesn't help anybody. And we do the format of our show the way that we do because, again, we are trying to find little nuggets of light in stories that sometimes are very, very dark. And sometimes there aren't places of light to be found in these stories, and that's okay. But typically we try to share what we discuss on the show with a less reverent lens than some other podcasts may take. And to Maddie's point, part of the reason that I include all of the links in the show notes is not only to validate that I actually did my research, but to also give listeners the opportunity where if they do want to learn more, there's all the source material that I used so you can go down your own rabbit hole.
It's a starting point.
We're going to leave it there and move on to something good. So what's something good you'd like to share, Maddie?
Something good. Have I given an update on Willie recently?
The last couple ones have been baking related.
Oh, okay. William, my service dog, my good golden boy, he has had some trouble with his weight, some trouble with some itchy skin and allergies, and I have been suspecting a low thyroid with him for a while and found a vet that agreed to test him. We confirmed it, and he's been on medication for a little over a week and a half now, and he is doing so much better. Yay. Overall. It's not like he was at death's door or anything, but you can just see his eyes are a little brighter. He's a little more playful. He has more energy. It seems like his rest, like when he sleeps, it's a little more
quality.
Yeah. Like he's just better. And like with the snowfall, Willie really, he loves snow. He loves making snow angels and snow worms, and he eats snow. And if you throw a snowball at him, he'll catch it and eat it. And the past couple of years, his desire to play in the snow has kind of dwindled a little bit. But with this last bout of snow, he's really gotten into it. And he's like, our backyard, if you look outside, there's just perfect like crop circles almost of all the little snow angels he's made. So I'm just happy that he's feeling better and that it wasn't a super scary, serious diagnosis. It's something that we can manage, and hopefully I can continue to keep him happy and healthy and the best boy ever, the best pancreas I've ever had. So yeah, that's my something good, is Willie is feeling better, and that's all I could ask for.
That's awesome.
Yeah. What about you?
I will say, I am excited for January because we are going to be having 4 episodes that month, because it's a 5-weeker, are all going to be interviews. And an author and a fellow podcaster, and I'm not going to name her name because I want it to be a cool surprise, but I will say she is someone that has worked closely with Paul Holes, which is pretty awesome. And I'm reading the advanced copy that I got of her book right now, and it's really, really good, and I'm very excited to talk to her. So I think January is going to be really cool for you guys, because it's going to be a lot of fun conversations, and hopefully that'll give me time to ease into my new job and before I start diving back into researching and writing content.
Nice. I'm glad you're able to take a break while simultaneously doing cool stuff for the podcast. Cool. That is a good thing.
All right, shall we?
Let's.
Want to be social with us? You can see pics from this week's episode, bonus content, and funny memes on X at Ye Olde Crime Pod, or on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, TikTok, and YouTube at Ye Olde Crime Podcast.
Speaking of YouTube, we have a special playlist just for our Can You Crack the Cramp Word segments with our guest podcasters to see who can correctly guess the meaning of some obscure Victorian slang terms. If that's your thing, check it out.
And on that note, as always, I'm Lindsay.
And I'm Madison.
And we'll see you next time with another tale
as old as crime.